So, this is kind of a continuation of what we had started a week ago, which was looking at Taigen Dan Leighton's book from 25 years ago, Cultivating the Empty Field, which was really the first focused text in English that looked at the teachings of Hongzhi. And where this is headed, I'm going to try and finish up my kind of the highlights of Taigen's introduction for this text, so that we kind of set the stage then for the session where the teaching I'm intending will be looking at what we just chanted, the second chant, guidepost of silent illumination, which is really for our tradition hugely important because of its impact on Dogen. So we think of our practice as being Dogen's Shiken Taza, just sitting. The Zazen is the foundation of our practice. But that didn't just pop out of thin air, out of nowhere. That came to Dogen through the teachings of Hongzhi, which he became very familiar with during the 4 years he was in China, especially the portion of that time where he had settled in at Tiantong Monastery, where he found his teacher, Ru Jing, because Hongzhi had also been at that temple almost 100 years previously. So Ru Jing would mention him frequently and with great respect and devotion. And that same reverence and devotion were also given expression by Dogen pretty much any time he mentioned him in his texts. So that's why we're kind of going in this direction, because I think it will hopefully be of assistance to everybody in their practice in terms of how we approach this Shiken Taza, this silent illumination, how we understand it. And in our understanding, how we go beyond the understanding into the actual immersion and illumination, which is not a conceptual exercise, which we'll get into. And that'll be a big part of the session. But first of all, just so that we can kind of be prepped for what we're going to be looking at that point, I wanted to give some more background, which I think Taigen does just a wonderful job of laying out in his introduction. So what I'll be doing this morning is, again, just kind of pulling some quotes from his introduction and elaborating a bit on those points. So the first point I wanted to pull is where Taigen says, one primary Soto teaching method is reflected in Hongzhi's frequent encouragement that practitioners embody the teaching with independence, illuminating fully on their own. The awareness that nobody can experience the truth for another led to the characteristic Soto style of usually not giving explicit directions, leaving students to realize personally their own inmost nature. Of course, that's the purpose of Sesshin. So when we take the really deep dive into this in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, I guess it'll be, that's what we're going to be doing. I mean, I'll be giving talks, but the real illumination is going to occur for each one independently. Sort of ties into what we talked about on Thursday, this coming together of the individual, that everyone is unique and experiences awakening as the title of Ben's chapter that we were looking at, alone, all alone. So there's that aspect. But yet within that is that sense of oneness. So you're not really alone, but you are. Those are both true at one and the same time. So what Taigen's giving expression to here is this independence, that the illumination occurs for each individual on their own. So it's not something that can be conveyed by a teacher. The teacher simply, and that's why the title of Hongzhi's text is really indicative here, guidepost of silent illumination. He's just offering a guidepost. He's not offering the silent illumination, but he's kind of, the guidepost is to kind of point to the path that then each individual needs to pursue for themselves. And it will be an individual pursuit. So the paths that each student takes will look a bit different. And that's just the nature of things. It's the only way silent illumination can take place. If it's not taking place in that way, Hongzhi and Dogen would say, well, that's not true silent illumination. Then you're just receiving ideas, concepts, and regurgitating those. But silent illumination has to be organic. And by that, I mean everything coming together within that individual's life, within your life, my life, and manifesting itself as your silent illumination, uniquely yours. Because the nature of existence is kind of dependent upon that range of diversity. The coming together of the relative and the absolute is pointing out to us the fact that diversity is essential for the whole to come together, to be the whole that furnishes this interdependence web that all beings are part of. All beings have to be uniquely individual, alone, but yet they also have to be part of that web of interdependence. So, guidepost of silent illumination, as we'll see, is pointing out, how do you do that? How do you practice all alone, but together with all beings? And hopefully everybody will get at least a taste of that through your practice during this session, and all the aspects of the practice that will take place over those multiple days that we're engaged in the session schedule. So Taigen goes on then to say, shining through the stories of Dongshan and his successors is the commitment to personal experience of the immanent presence of suchness and the radical transcendence of all dualistic views, however subtle. And I think we spoke last week about the subtlety with which these dualistic views kind of get embedded and start coming up. But the practice of silent illumination is to go beyond all of that. Think of it this way in terms of the emptiness, the interdependence of all things. In our practice, when we first come to it, you know, we really, because of our conditioning, we can't fully enter into that truth. It takes practice to do that because we're thinking about it, we're conceptualizing about it, and we set up things to achieve, to attain. But to actually engage in silent illumination means setting aside everything and realizing that even your thought is just a manifestation of suchness, not the other way around. That your thought is kind of like this objective observer, but rather your thought is just another manifestation of it, nothing special. When you see that, it becomes even easier to let go of thoughts, set them aside, because they are nothing special. What's special is this coming together of all things to create each and every suchness. Whether it's an act of kindness, or a thought, or a task you're performing, they're all, from the standpoint of silent illumination, of living an awakened life, they're all just no difference. They're all just emanations of suchness. And to see that with your thought is powerful. That's kind of like the deep end of practicing the silence and silent illumination. That's the quieting of the mind. Because you recognize all that activity is not privileged in the sense that it's the guidepost. We tend to think the guidepost is all our thoughts about it. That will guide us because that's our conditioning. That's the way we approach everything. But this practice is different. This practice is even letting that go. So here, uh, uh, in Guidepost of Silent Illumination, Hongzhi clearly stresses the indispensability and interdependence of both serenity and illumination, of the calmness, silence, and the illumination or insight. That they're both interdependent and vital. And hopefully through your practice, you come to experience the interdependence. That by entering into this deep silence and being able to experience things in their suchness, everything, each breath, each thought, everything is just suchness, what's arising right now. Kind of echoes a teaching of Reb Anderson's about Zazen that I heard him give many, many years ago. That Zazen is just the meeting of each thing that arises with complete relaxation. The complete relaxation, speaking of the silence. And meeting each thing in silence. So silence is the supreme speech, as Hongzhi says in Guidepost of Silent Illumination. That kind of gives us a window into what he's speaking about there. That silence gives us that window into speech and everything else. So we turn none of it into some sort of absolute. Silence is that great leveler and clarifier. We can see things with great clarity when we enter into that silence. And all the spiritual traditions have that aspect to them. Christianity from the earliest times, the desert fathers and mothers, because women were going off to the deserts too, of North Africa and the Middle East, to engage in this kind of practice. So Christianity knew about this stuff. It was a little further along. Taigen says the ultimate purpose of spiritual practice is to realize both wisdom's illuminating insight and its appropriate functioning in the ordinary world of beings. The practice aspect, that it emanates into everything we do. Its appropriate functioning in the ordinary world of beings. So how do we conduct practice? Why do we form sanghas? Why is sangha one of the three treasures? Because for illumination to be real, it has to be made manifest. It's just another way of seeing the equivalence of wisdom and compassion. That it's not wisdom unless you really embody it in your activity. Otherwise, it's kind of a guarantee that it's just a thought you have. It's not real. It becomes real when it comes forth with no agenda, not trying to be awakened or compassionate or generous or any of those things. But it just manifests. It has to. Because we've kind of been transformed in terms of the way we're now relating to our life, to all beings. And the next quote comes directly from Hongzhi. It is said that false thinking is stopped and stillness or concentration necessarily arises. Stillness arises and wisdom appears. Wisdom arises and stillness necessarily disappears in active functioning. That disappearance of stillness so that we can become functioning. So this stillness is not an escape. That's a real important message here. Because there were Rinzai teachers that pointed to that as one of the potential problems of the Soto Zen approach. And they were exactly right. I mean, the practice of stillness can become problematic because we can just hang out there. And even in the Theravadan tradition, their practices of stillness, of concentration, were kind of packaged into what they called the jhanas, which are powerful tools. But a teacher of the jhanas is always on watch for somebody who just kind of wants to keep going there and hanging out there because they're blissful states. And that's not awakening. So this progression from stillness to wisdom, but then from wisdom into functioning. kind of a variation of this, since we've been looking at Dongshan, because as I've said, the teachings of the relationships between the absolute and the relative is really a key element of what Hongzhi is talking about. Well, there's a well-known koan involving Dongshan's teacher, Yunyan, that involves sweeping during work practice. So, to set the stage for this, Yunyan had, I don't know if it was a biological brother or just a dharma brother, but he's referred to in the koan as a brother, Dawu. And so Yunyan, like a good Zen monk, is really vigorously sweeping the floor, really actively engaged. And Dawu comes over and says, "Too busy." where's your stillness, your calmness? And Yunyan's reply was, "You should know there's one who's not busy. That stillness is still there." But Dawu wouldn't stop there. He was going to push him a little bit further. Uh, as soon as Yunyan references one who is not busy, duality, right? And the way Dawu responded then was, well, you just created a second moon, pointing to the duality. So at which Yunyan then holds up his broom to him, which moon is this? Bring him right back to suchness, this. This act of sweep, that it brings together the functioning and still the stillness. It's not that the stillness has to disappear, but not to see the stillness as this dominant force that always needs to be manifest because you're just always still, non-functioning. That's not the practice either. In fact, the practice is actually to become very functional. And within the stillness, within the wisdom. I mean, as Rinzai people would say, what a waste. You know, all you're doing is staring at the wall. What kind of practice is that? That would be my thought too, actually. So if I was convinced that was what Soto was all about, I'd be with the Rinzai folks. But I know better. That's not what the Soto practice is about. It's about bringing all this together in suchness. As Dogen says, if you want to realize suchness, practice it without delay, right here and now. And that's where the practice has to be, right here and now, not caught up in our thoughts about what I should do. That's why we talk sometimes about how should is a real big potential problem. That it just needs to be a natural embodiment. Practice suchness, because that's your understanding consistently as to the nature of your life and the lives of everyone else. As Taigen very beautifully expresses it right after that quote from Hongzhi. He says, for Hongzhi, the whole purpose of practice is to graciously share yourself with the 100 grass tips, which he then shows in brackets, i.e., the myriad things, with everything. Graciously share yourself with all beings in the busy marketplace. So we're back to this sense of functioning, being out there. That's where our practice takes place. And next, Taigen talks about Dogen's reverence for Hongzhi. He says, Dogen clearly reveres Hongzhi, referring to him particularly as an ancient Buddha, and says that Hongzhi is also the only person that his teacher Ru Jing ever called an ancient Buddha. The only one. Dogen calls the silent illumination meditation taught by Hongzhi shikantaza, or just sitting. So that's the term as we now understand it today as Soto Zen practitioners. What is your practice? Shikantaza. Just sitting. But the just doesn't mean only. The just means without any ulterior purpose, that you're not doing it to attain something else. Just sitting means when we sit, that's all that's involved. We're not sitting to become enlightened, to become better people, to reduce our blood pressure, and so on and so forth. We're just sitting. Period. End of narrative. So there is no narrative. Just sitting. And Dogen also calls the silent illumination. Oh, wait a minute. I just read that. Hongzhi's objectless illumination does not deny the objectifications in our experience, but simply allows them to melt naturally into unified awareness. Real important point. So let's spend a bit of time. I already, I think, earlier in this talk hinted at this in terms of working with our thoughts. Objectless illumination doesn't deny our thoughts, our ideas, our concepts, which obviously arise and we experience them. So they are there. But this silent illumination, objectless illumination, allows those thoughts, those ideas, those concepts to melt naturally into unified awareness. So like I was saying, there's this commonality that's melting into. We privilege our thoughts and our ideas and our concepts. So they become dominant, letting them melt back into the emptiness of all things, the unity of all things. Means we accept them. That's who we are. And from the standpoint of the conventional, as we've discussed on many occasions, they have a role to play. So we're not saying stop thinking. Taigen used to refer to that as the lobotomy school of Zen, which he made a point of saying he doesn't recommend that. We are thinking beings. But it's to see the thoughts as just another arising out of suchness. So scientifically, we can look at the ability of thinking from the standpoint of theories of evolution, that they were helpful to our species and other life forms, since we don't have a monopoly on thought. They can be helpful in terms of our ability to survive and propagate. It's a handy tool to have to think. So that's a good rational account for it. Makes sense. But if we really look at it from that deep spiritual viewpoint, well, but what is it really? What is thinking? Spiritual, a spiritual tradition can give, I think, a satisfying response to that, which is what the guidepost of silent illumination is doing. Is that it's just one more aspect of reality. And the beauty of that account is that it kind of puts us puts up a stop sign in the path of our tendency to elevate ourselves because we're thinking beings, which is, of course, tied into our sense of self that we inflate. So thought becomes something very special. Rather than being just another aspect of suchness, of the common universal, it becomes a defining trait for me. I have beautiful thoughts. So hooray for me. But to see thoughts as they're being portrayed here is to see them as that's just the nature of things. And no reason to think that I'm the only one who has that capability. You know, and hats off to modern science because they're even going so far as to say, well, plants, probably fungi, have consciousness. You know, things that would have gotten you burned at the stake not that terribly long ago. Now, it's not even seen as just some new agey stuff. It's like, scientists are even coming out saying what we have to do is open our mind about what is consciousness, what is thinking. Instead of narrowing it down to our domain, it's actually part of the common domain. So it's moving towards what's being portrayed here. And then another important quote from Taigen I wanted to make sure we got in here. The backward step of turning the light to shine within, directing one's attention to observe closely one's own awareness, is a basic Zen meditation technique. So really important. What's being spoken to here is that this very practice of turning the light to shine within, or as Dogen refers to it as to study Zen, is to study the self. That's taking the backward step and turning the light within. But to study the self is to forget the self, to let that drop off. Because when we do that, then that simply becomes part of the universal, rather than the study of the self as the elevation of the self, or trying to manipulate the self, control the self, and use the self to control other things. So to study the self is to forget the self, is this practice of silent illumination and just letting that self melt back into common existence, because that's what it is, to see it that way and to be open to the fact that other beings probably have something similar going on. Stop elevating ourselves, making that discriminating judgment. That's at the heart of our practice, which is why we're always talking about non-duality. non-judgmental. That's a direct outflow of this practice of shikantaza, silent illumination, to see things through that light. Which, if we want to speak theologically, it would be seeing the divine everywhere. And the divine just being another term for the absolute, the essential nature of all things. Not just seeing that within ourselves, which, of course, a lot of theologians fall into that trap. That we are the divine. Doesn't necessarily extend out to everything, but sure covers us. And that's all we're worried about anyway. Right? So that's staying within the realm of delusion, the realm of discrimination, the realm of judging. And next quote is from Dogen himself. Whenever a thought occurs, be aware of it. As soon as you are aware of it, it will vanish. Basic Soto Zen teaching. If you remain for a long period forgetful of objects, you will naturally become unified. This is the essential art of Zazen. Remaining for a long period forgetful of objects, opening the hand of thought. Because it's thought that's creating the world of objects, identifying things in terms of what they are. And the only way we can do that is by distinguishing it from other things. So this path is actually taking a very opposite approach. Rather than separating it from other things, it's melting it back in to everything else. That's what the Huayan teachings of interdependence are all about. It's part of that melting process. Everything's interdependent with everything else. Pure and simple. So if we really see things from that perspective, then the unique characteristics are not to be denied. They are there, but we begin to see them as being in service to the whole. And of course, in our time, we're already far enough along in our common understanding, thanks to fields like ecological science, to see where that mindset can take us to a pretty good place where we see the importance of the uniqueness of all the various life forms and their contribution to the whole. So by taking care of each entity, we're taking care of the whole, which means taking care of all of us. To take care of one is to take care of all, at one and the same time. So that's one way of manifesting this understanding of the uniqueness of each thing, but its commonality because of the web of interdependence. So it makes each thing so important to everything else. And that's all based on their uniqueness. But because they're also part of the whole, it's what makes each thing of supreme value. So we're elevating, but not one being over another. We're elevating everything. That everything needs our special attention. Hence the importance of meeting each thing that arises rather than saying, oh, that one's not so important. So I don't need to worry about meeting that one. Meeting each thing from this place of silence, complete relaxation. And now back to Hongzhi with a quote. The essence is to empty and open our body and mind as expansive as the great emptiness of space. Naturally, in the entire territory, all is satisfied. To empty and open our body and mind. So this is the practice of Zazen, opening the hand of thought, letting go of thoughts, not holding on to anything. That's to empty and open out, which makes us as expansive as the great emptiness of space. So now that this practice is the way to see ourselves as just part of the emptiness of all things, because we've emptied our sense of self, dropping off of body and mind, as Dogen expresses it. Then we become one with all beings. And then we become wise. Wise guys and gals of Soto Zen. And naturally, in the entire territory, all is satisfied because of interdependence when we do that. And the way we then address each individual thing. Because of interdependence, like I was saying, if we care for one, we care for all. So all is satisfied. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them, free them. That's the practice. We accomplish that each and every time we care for this being. We think, oh my, I have to individually take care of every single one because that's the way our mind operates. But no, with wisdom, we understand. Take care of this one. So we live that vow just by following Reb's advice. Meet each thing that arises with complete relaxation. That's carrying out the first bodhisattva vow. That's it. Do that and you're constantly saving all beings. So I think that didn't quite get through the introduction, but I think far enough. So I think we set the stage for guidepost of silent illumination. And hopefully when we dive into that text, this will kind of, you'll be starting at a deeper level with it. So I think this was time well spent. So let me bow out here and invite any thoughts, questions you might have. Doug. Whoop, are you muted?
I was.
Oh,
Am I not? All right, so these are new buttons on this new system. But anyway, if you hear me, I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate maybe on suchness? Because when I think of suchness, I mean, it's a new term for me, new in terms of being part of this group and this organization of Buddhism.
Yeah.
But we used to use the phrase being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it. Mm-hmm. And my previous group that I was in years ago, when I first probably was introduced to any of this, back when I was 19. So, I mean, so is suchness more than just being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Because being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it is mindfulness. That's what that is. So it's a practice, and it's an important practice. But suchness is also, and the reason why this factors so heavily into the practice of silent illumination, suchness is the gateway into awakening, wisdom, compassion. It's like it puts us right there into that very deep understanding Mindfulness is certainly also an important preparation, and it's an important practice to be engaged in. To be able to meet each thing that arises is to be aware that we're really aware of what it is we're doing. So they certainly are complementary, but suchness is describing the nature of things, how things come to be. So interdependence enters into that because things come to be because of being part of the web of all things.
So does suchness come about as a result of being aware of what you're doing while you're doing it? Have that conscious awareness that, I am doing something in this moment. Could be sweeping the floor, it could be many things, but that awareness that
Yeah,
not that emptiness, not that voidness of just the mind going tumbling on
right.
itself while I'm sweeping the floor.
Yeah,
Whereas aware that I'm aware of sweeping the floor, and I'm aware in that I'm observing myself doing something, and
right.
what are my thoughts and maybe my emotions that uh, are there at the same time. That not necessarily exclusive to sweeping the floor, but it could be opening my door, it could be getting my car. But
Yeah,
it seems to me one is the presence of something, and one is the absence of something. And such as it sounds like you're saying is something else again.
exactly. And I'll use your description of mindfulness to help point to that. We could be mindfully aware of burglarizing. And you'd be a much better burglar if you were mindfully aware, right? You'd really
Yeah.
be attentive. So mindfulness is a good practice, but it doesn't necessarily tie in to our practice in a one-on-one basis. That it is it because we can practice mindfully anything. Even if it's causing great harm, violation of precepts, we could be very mindfully engaged in it. So that I think helps draw our attention to the fact that that mindfulness itself depends on some other things
So
to
is it
make
mind?
it a spiritual practice.
Would it be mindfulness then wed to um, I'll say right action or awareness of right action?
The entire Eightfold Path, which
Okay.
would include right action, yeah.
All
It's
right.
just one aspect, but taken apart from all the other aspects, so it's interdependent. And suchness is understanding interdependence. So we could practice mindfulness and miss the boat because we don't understand its interdependence with those other factors. Suchness means we're seeing this common base, if that helps at all. But I do see them as being importantly different aspects of the practice.
Well, I think I see what you're saying, that mindfulness in and of itself is not necessarily wisdom or practicing, say, good,
Yeah.
something that is beneficial to all
Could be
beings.
very self-centered.
Yeah, it could be, yeah, yeah, and it could be very destructive at the same time. But so it's, it is that mindfulness um, in association with, or undergirded by, or somehow wed to. Um, I'm not going to use the word wisdom, but there's probably a better word for it, of right action, of
Right.
doing things that are not. So what am I engaged in? Where am I going with this, or where am I at this particular moment? Uh, there has to be something to discriminate, I guess, that where I'm at is productive, uh, uh, good, supportive, or is it just me watching me kill somebody or something of that effect, and having that sort of awareness? I mean, there's got to be some. So suchness is, yeah, and I'm anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Suchness is seeing each thing as part of this web of interdependence. So it's seeing the unity, really, of the individual, the unique individual, and the web of interdependence that includes everything. Nothing is excluded from it. Suchness is seeing how those two aspects of reality are always together in each and everything. That's wisdom.
So in suchness, in that respect, is that an opportunity to choose a better
Well, better is a problem. It's because now we're caught up in this. We're moving away from this sense of commonality, which we're trying to have it work together always. The individual and the web, that they're always completely combined. Always. That's the only way either one can exist. So to
yeah.
see things in their suchness is to see that truth about each thing, and that becomes our guidepost. So there really isn't this act of comparing and evaluating that's at the heart of it. Now that might happen, but then we see that as just an emanation from this as suchness due to its interdependence with all these other things. Like the society we were brought up in, the way we were educated, the way we tend to think, are all factors involved. So even when we're evaluating something, it's important we see that process of evaluation in its suchness. See, what you're describing is our tendency to elevate that and make that the privileged position. And there is no privileged position. It's all suchness. And to see it that way.
Well, I'm not intending to, in my thinking at least, to see it as an elevated position, just as an opportunity to choose better. And I guess I would say better because,
Better is elevated, right?
well, but isn't better also a discrimination? Aren't you saying to somebody, they're not all the same, they're not all equal.
Right.
Feeding someone is not the same as feeding somebody who's hungry. Those are not the same. They're both activities, but they're not, they're not certainly not the same. You would choose one because of some belief that doing good for others is better than not doing good for others, which is a discrimination. Isn't that a judgment based upon a set of values, some set of values, some a code of values.
I think it would be important for a person to study the self, to take the backward steps and shine the light within to see why are they making that distinction. And that's just, and I'm not saying making a distinction there is right or wrong, but it's really important to be able to have that capacity to look into that, to see, is this in fact self-serving? That's all I'm saying is it's not like bedrock. And bedrock is where we tend to place that judgmental mind. And that's why we put so much energy into the things we do judge, because we take it so very seriously. And when we open ourselves, then maybe we come up with the same, I'll call it provisionally a judgment, an evaluation, but we're holding it more lightly because we recognize its emptiness, and that my judgment is the result of all these causes and conditions. That's a big awakening there, because usually we use these terms like better. And if it's better, that's kind of an absolute term. I mean, it's better. So discussion is over. Openness is ended. This is better. So we could say provisionally, this might be the better way to go, the better way to travel to get from point A to point B, but not to be locked in. So we just become adamant. So we can see how this sort of thing plays out in our lives, and that's the important thing. We can use these terms and approach things in this way, but what's essential is that we have this more open attitude about them and see that what I term better is just the result of interdependencies. Causes and conditions lead me to have that thought that this is better. But also understanding somebody else with different causes and conditions might very well see something else as better. So better becomes part of the world of the conventional, the relative, rather than turning it into the absolute. Better is better, right? What more do I need to say? End of discussion. That's the road that we create for ourselves there. So all I'm saying is we need to be real careful there, and we need to see, as we looked at in what I was covering this morning, the emptiness of all things, including our judgments. Of
And I
course,
think
we're
that,
going to be judgmental, but see that that's empty.
yeah, that's one of those terms of Buddhism that I've never really grasped, which is emptiness.
Right? It's at the heart of it, and
So
all it, yeah.
to be continued, I guess. I mean, I know I come up always with a what when I hear the word emptiness. So I mean, I'll just maybe park it and reflect. But
Yeah.
I know I can say that much of myself, at least. That's an area that still is yeah, I won't say empty. I'm not trying to be playing on words here, but I mean, it's a term that I'm not quite sure I understand at all when it comes to how it's used in Zen Buddhism, what it means. Because I mean, I don't like to think of Zen Buddhism as something separate from my life, world,
Right.
everything as
Yeah.
it is. It should be integrated.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
not in that sense, but it's because it's used and used often in Zen teachings, emptiness. It has to have some meaning for me at some level, for all of us. We can't use the word collectively unless we share some definition.
And
Accept.
all I would suggest is that emptiness is is where we travel, the realm we're traveling in through the practice of letting go and opening ourselves up. That's entering into the realm of emptiness. It can only happen through letting go and opening. If it does, if the letting go and opening isn't happening, then you'll never experience emptiness, because it goes beyond thought. Because it has to go beyond thought, because the practice is about letting go of thoughts. So any thought you have, including discriminatory thoughts, especially those, have to be let go. Set it aside. They don't have to be stopped, but drain it of all its energy. Just set it aside, let it go. And come back to this. Like our tendency to prejudge things, for instance. If we see that's happening, can we let that go and come back and be more open to whatever it is that's presenting itself to us? It's kind of similar, I think, to that kind of a practice, which I would hope we can all see as being pretty vital to living a good life. And we're going to have to close up here because we're already at noon, and we've got a resident here that we have to be mindful of.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it was a good discussion. All right. So let's go ahead and chant that. May our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. The Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. All right. Well, hope everybody enjoys the rest of your weekend.